What's the most heartbreaking thing you've heard about yourself? The most heartbreaking thing I ever heard about myself came from my own mother. It wasn't meant for my ears, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I was 12 when I overheard her talking to my aunt in our kitchen. I had just gotten home from school and was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. Andrew's never going to be the son I wanted. My mom sighed. I love him, of course, but he's nothing like his father. He doesn't care about sports. He has no interest in playing football or baseball. He'd rather be digging in the dirt or reading those weird science books. My aunt made some sound of agreement as I stood frozen in the hallway. Sometimes I look at him and wonder if the hospital made a mistake. My mom continued. There's no way this awkward, nerdy kid came from me. I tiptoed back to the front door, opened it loudly, and yelled, "I'm home," like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. For the next 5 years, I tried to become the son my mom wanted. I quit my science club, threw away my bug collection, and signed up for football tryouts. I started working out, trying to bulk up my scrawny frame, and shopping at the sports stores my dad liked. I even joined the wrestling team, even though I was terrible at it. Every night, I'd stare at myself in the mirror and try to see what my mom saw. This disappointment, this mistake. Last year, my science teacher nominated me for a summer program at the state university. It was a huge honor. Only 5 students from each state got selected. When the acceptance letter came, I hid it in my desk drawer and never mentioned it. But my teacher called my mom to congratulate her. That night, I found her sitting on my bed, holding my acceptance letter. She looked confused. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" she asked. I shrugged, staring at the floor. I wasn't going to accept it anyway. But why not? This is amazing, Andrew. I couldn't hold it back anymore. Because I'm trying to be the son you actually wanted, not the mistake you got stuck with. Her face went white. Andrew, I was just venting. I was overwhelmed and stupid, and it doesn't matter. I cut her off. I've spent 5 years trying to be someone else, someone you could be proud of. My mom started crying. "Do you know why I said those things?" she whispered. "Because I was terrified of you. You were so smart, so confident in who you were. At 12, you knew yourself better than I knew myself at 30. She reached for my hands. "The truth is, I was jealous. You're exactly who you're supposed to be, while I spent my whole life trying to be what everyone else wanted. And instead of admiring your strength, I tried to make you small like me." Before she left, she handed me a small package. Inside was a beautiful microscope and a note. "For my brilliant son, never hide who you are again. Being your mother is the greatest privilege of my life." I sat there staring at that microscope for what felt like hours, feeling like I was seeing myself clearly for the first time in years. But as relieved as I was, I also felt this overwhelming sense of loss. 5 years. 5 entire years of my life wasted trying to be someone I wasn't. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of excitement and dread. I'd accepted the summer program, but I hadn't told anyone except my mom. The wrestling season was still going on, and I had practice after school. Coach Henderson had been pushing me hard lately, saying I might actually make varsity next year if I kept working. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just when I was getting decent at something I hated, I was ready to quit. At school, I found myself looking at everything differently. The hallways that had felt like a prison for years suddenly seemed smaller somehow, less important. I walked past the trophy cases where the football and wrestling photos were displayed, and for the first time, I didn't feel that familiar pang of inadequacy. Instead, I felt sorry for my teammates who looked so serious, so stressed about living up to expectations that weren't even their own. During lunch, I sat with my usual group, guys from the wrestling team mostly, plus a few football players. They were talking about the upcoming district championships, and Marcus, our team captain, was going on about how his dad would kill him if he didn't place in the top 3. "My old man's already talking about college scholarships," Marcus said, stabbing his sandwich aggressively. "Says if I don't get recruited, I might as well not come home." The other guys nodded along, sharing similar stories about parental pressure. I used to contribute to these conversations, complaining about how my mom wanted me to bulk up more, or how my dad kept suggesting I try out for football instead. But today, I just listened, really listened, and realized how miserable they all sounded. "What about you, Drew?" Marcus asked. "Your mom's still on your case about making varsity." I opened my mouth to give my usual response, but something different came out. "Actually, she's been pretty supportive lately." The table went quiet. This wasn't the kind of thing we usually talked about. Supportive parents were almost suspicious in our circle. "Lucky you," said Jake, another wrestler. "My dad's been timing my workouts and tracking my diet. Says I need to drop another weight class if I want to be competitive." As I looked around the table, I saw myself reflected in their faces. The constant anxiety, the need to prove themselves, the fear of disappointing parents who seemed to love their achievements more than they loved them. It was like looking at who I'd been just 24 hours ago. After lunch, I had AP Biology with Mrs. Chen, the teacher who'd nominated me for the summer program. She caught my eye as I walked in and gave me a small smile. After class, she asked me to stay behind. "I heard you accepted the program," she said once the other students had left. "I have to say I was worried when you didn't respond right away." "Yeah, I needed to think about it." Mrs. Chen studied my face with the kind of attention she usually reserved for microscope slides. "Andrew, can I ask you something? What made you hesitate? This is exactly the kind of opportunity someone with your interests and abilities should jump at." I found myself telling her everything, not just about overhearing my mom, but about the 5 years that followed, about quitting science club, about forcing myself through wrestling practice, about staring at myself in the mirror every night wondering why I wasn't good enough. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more concerned as I went on. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You know," she finally said, "I've been teaching for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of bright kids lose themselves trying to fit into boxes that were never meant for them. But I've also seen what happens when they find their way back. She walked over to her desk and pulled out a folder thick with papers. These are applications from students who want to get into the summer program. Hundreds of them. Want to know what made yours stand out? I nodded, curious despite myself. It wasn't just your grades, though they're excellent. It was your essay about the ecosystem in your backyard. You wrote about spending hours observing the interactions between different species, about how you'd created detailed charts tracking which plants attracted which insects, about how you'd figured out the feeding patterns of the local bird population. She handed me a copy of my own essay, and I barely recognized it. I'd written it during one of my last science club meetings, before I'd decided to quit. Reading it now, I could see the passion practically radiating off the page. Andrew, do you know what most kids your age write about? Sports achievements, popular kids they want to impress, things they think we want to hear. But you wrote about something you genuinely loved, something that made you light up from the inside. That's not something you can fake. I felt my throat tighten. But what if I'm too far behind? I haven't been in science club for years. I probably don't know half of what the other kids know. Mrs. Chen laughed. Andrew, you've been getting A's in my class without even trying. You answer questions that challenge seniors. Trust me, you haven't lost anything that matters. That afternoon, I went to wrestling practice with a different mindset. Instead of dreading it, I found myself curious about how it would feel to be there while knowing I didn't have to be. Coach Henderson put us through our usual drills, and I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the summer program, about the research projects I might work on, about the professors I'd meet. For the first time in years, I was excited about my future instead of anxious about it. After practice, Marcus approached me in the locker room. You seem distracted today. Everything okay? I considered lying, giving him the easy answer he expected. But something about Mrs. Chen's words stuck with me. Actually, I think I'm gonna quit the team. The locker room suddenly got very quiet. Even guys who'd been in their own conversations turned to look at us. Quit. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. Dude, you're finally getting good. Coach was just saying you might make varsity next year. I know, but this isn't really what I want to be doing. So what do you want to do? Sit around and read books all day. The old me would have been stung by the dismissive tone. The old me would have backtracked, made excuses, maybe even changed my mind. But today, I just shrugged. Maybe. Or maybe I'll study insects, or work on environmental research, or figure out how to solve climate change. I don't know yet, but I'm excited to find out. Marcus stared at me like I'd grown a second head. You're kidding, right? You're going to throw away everything you've worked for to go back to being a nerd. I was never not a nerd, Marcus. I just spent 5 years pretending to be something else. The conversation ended there, but I could feel the other guys watching me as I packed up my gear. Some looked confused, others seemed almost envious. Jake, the one whose dad was controlling his diet, caught my eye and gave me a small nod. I wondered if he understood what I was doing better than he could admit. The drive home was interesting. Usually after practice, I'd spend the time mentally preparing for dinner conversation with my parents, trying to think of positive things to say about wrestling, preparing for questions about my performance. Today, I found myself thinking about the summer program instead, about what I might learn, about who I might become. When I got home, both my parents were in the kitchen. My dad was reading the newspaper while my mom cooked dinner. They looked up when I walked in, and I could see the question in their eyes. They were still adjusting to this new dynamic where they didn't have to walk on eggshells around me. How was practice? My dad asked, and I could tell he was trying to sound casual. It was fine. Actually, I need to talk to you both about something. They exchanged a glance, and I realized they were probably expecting me to announce that I was quitting the summer program, that I'd changed my mind and wanted to go back to focusing on sports. I'm going to quit wrestling, I said. I want to focus on the summer program and get back into science club. My dad's newspaper rustled as he set it down. Are you sure? You've worked so hard to get where you are? That's just it, Dad. I worked hard to get somewhere I never wanted to be in the first place. My mom turned from the stove, and I could see she was trying not to cry. Andrew, you don't have to quit wrestling because of what I said. You can do both. I'm not quitting because of what you said. I'm quitting because I finally remembered who I am. We talked for another hour, and it was the most honest conversation we'd had as a family in years. My dad admitted that he'd been pushing the sports angle because he thought it would make me more confident, more popular. My mom confessed that she'd been living vicariously through my achievements, trying to recreate the high school experience she'd wished she'd had. We made a lot of mistakes, my dad said finally, but we're proud of you. We've always been proud of you. We just didn't know how to show it. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. I officially quit the wrestling team, which caused more drama than I'd expected. Coach Henderson called my parents, convinced that I was making a huge mistake. Some of my teammates acted like I'd betrayed them personally, but others, like Jake, quietly asked me about the summer program, about how I'd found the courage to make such a big change. Rejoining science club was awkward at first. I'd been gone for years, and the current members weren't sure what to make of my return. But Mrs. Chen helped smooth the transition, and it didn't take long for me to fall back into the rhythm of experimental design and data analysis. The president of science club was a girl named Sarah, who was in my grade but whom I'd barely spoken to during my wrestling years. She was working on a project about microplastics and local water sources, and when she explained her methodology, I found myself making suggestions that actually helped improve her experimental design. Where did you learn about statistical analysis? She asked after one of our meetings. I've been reading about it on my own, I admitted. I know I'm behind compared to everyone else. Sarah laughed. Behind? Andrew, you just helped me solve a problem I've been working on for months. You're not behind, you're just getting started. As the weeks passed, I felt more like myself than I had in years. I started carrying a field notebook notebook again, jotting down observations about the natural world around me. I signed up for extra science courses for next year. I even started a blog about local wildlife, sharing photos and data from my backyard observations. But the biggest change was in my relationship with my parents. Without the constant pressure of sports performance hanging over us, we actually started talking about things that mattered. My mom showed me photos from her own high school years, explaining how she'd felt like an outsider, how she'd wished she'd been brave enough to join the academic clubs instead of trying to fit in with a popular crowd. My dad, meanwhile, revealed that he'd been a math whiz in high school before social pressure convinced him to focus on football instead. He'd always regretted not pursuing engineering, and seeing me rediscover my passion for science was bringing back his own buried interests. "You know what?" he said one evening as we looked at Saturn through my new telescope. "I've been thinking about taking some night classes, maybe getting that engineering degree I always wanted." "Really?" I couldn't hide my excitement. "What kind of engineering?" "Environmental, maybe. Your passion for this stuff is contagious." Spring came early that year, and with it the final preparations for the summer program. I'd been accepted to work with Dr. Martinez, a renowned entomologist who was studying the effects of climate change on insect populations. When I told Sarah about it, she high-fived me so enthusiastically that we both fell over laughing. "This is exactly what you're meant to be doing," she said. "I can't believe you almost gave this up for wrestling." "Neither can I admitted. "But I'm glad I found my way back." The summer program was everything I'd hoped for and more. Working alongside other students who shared my passion was like finding a tribe I'd never known existed. Dr. Martinez was patient and encouraging, treating us like junior colleagues rather than just students. My project involved tracking butterfly migration patterns and how they were being affected by changing weather patterns. On the third week of the program, my parents drove up for a family visit day. I was nervous about introducing them to my new world, worried they might not understand what I was so excited about. But when they saw me presenting my preliminary findings to a group of graduate students and professors, I could see the pride in their eyes. "That's my son," I heard my mom whisper to another parent. "He's studying butterfly migration." There was no embarrassment in her voice, no apology for my interests, just pure pride. After my presentation, Dr. Martinez pulled my parents aside to talk with them. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw my mom start crying. Good tears this time. Later, she told me what he'd said. "He said you were one of the most naturally gifted young scientists he'd worked with. He said you had an intuitive understanding of ecological systems that couldn't be taught, only nurtured." My dad was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm sorry it took us so long to see what was right in front of us." "You see it now," I said. "That's what matters." The program culminated in a research symposium where all the students presented their work to a panel of university professors and graduate school admissions officers. I was nervous, but also excited. This was my element, my passion, my future. My presentation went better than I dared hope. The questions from the panel were challenging but fair, and I found myself thinking on my feet, drawing connections between my research and broader environmental issues. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment, then erupted in applause. Afterward, 3 different professors approached me about potential opportunities. Dr. Williams from the Environmental Science Department invited me to apply for early admission to their program. Kim from the Biology Department offered me a spot in her lab if I decided to attend their university. Most exciting of all, Dr. Martinez asked if I'd be interested in co-authoring a paper based on my summer research. "Co-authoring," I stammered, "but I'm just a high school student." "You're a scientist," he corrected. "Age is just a number. Your work is publication quality, and you deserve recognition for it." As I drove home with my parents, I felt a deep sense of completion. Not the kind of completion that comes from finishing something, but the kind that comes from finally becoming who you're meant to be. "I have something to tell you," my mom said as we pulled into our driveway. "I've been thinking about what you said, about how you spent 5 years trying to be someone else. I realized I've been doing the same thing my whole life." She turned to face me. "I enrolled in college classes. I'm going to finish my degree in environmental studies. I want to understand the world you're so passionate about." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Mom, that's amazing. I figure it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be," she said. "You taught me that." Senior year was a completely different experience. Instead of dreading each day, I woke up excited about what I might learn. I was taking advanced placement courses in biology, chemistry, and environmental science. I'd been elected president of the science club. My research blog had gained a following among local naturalists and even some college professors. But the biggest change was in how I related to other people. I'd spent so many years trying to fit in with groups where I didn't belong that I'd forgotten what it felt like to have genuine friendships. Now, surrounded by people who shared my interests and values, I was learning what authentic connection looked like. Sarah and I had become close friends, bonding over our shared love of field research and our dreams of graduate school. She was planning to study marine biology, and we spent hours discussing how our future research might complement each other. There was something comfortable about being around someone who didn't need me to explain why I got excited about data analysis, or why I'd rather spend a Saturday tracking bird migrations than at a party. One evening in late fall, I was in my room organizing my college applications when my mom knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I have something for you." She handed me a scrapbook I'd never seen before. The cover read "Andrew, our amazing son" in her careful handwriting. Inside were photos and mementos from throughout my childhood, but these weren't the typical sports photos and achievement certificates that filled most family albums. Instead, there were pictures of me at age 6, carefully examining a caterpillar on a leaf, a drawing I'd made at 8 of the food chain in our backyard pond, a certificate from a science fair in 4th grade that I'd completely forgotten about, a photo of me at 10, grinning as I showed off a butterfly that had landed on my hand. I found these when I was cleaning out the attic, my mom said softly. I realized I'd been so focused on who I thought you should become that I'd forgotten to celebrate who you already were. I flipped through the pages, seeing my childhood self through new eyes. That little boy who was fascinated by insects, who asked endless questions about how things worked, who could spend hours observing the natural world. He'd been the real me all along. Mom, I said, my voice catching slightly. This is incredible. There's something else, she said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a leather-bound journal. I've been keeping this since you started the summer program. It's a record of all your achievements, your research, your discoveries. I wanted to make sure I never lost sight of who you really are again. The journal was filled with printouts of my blog posts, photos from science club meetings, copies of my research notes, and her own observations about my growth and discoveries. It was like a love letter to the person I was becoming, or maybe the person I'd always been. I love you exactly as you are, she said. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out how to show it. College application season was both stressful and exciting. I was applying to programs that actually aligned with my interests and goals, which made writing the essays feel authentic rather than performative. When I wrote about my passion for environmental science, about my research experience, about my dreams of contributing to conservation efforts, the words flowed naturally. The waiting period was nerve-wracking, but I tried to focus on the present. I had one more semester of high school to enjoy, research projects to complete, and friendships to deepen. Whatever happened with college, I knew I was on the right path. In February, the acceptance letters started arriving. The first one was from my safety school, accepted with a merit scholarship. Then came acceptances from 3 more universities, each with increasingly generous financial aid packages. But the one I was really waiting for was from Dr. Martinez's university, where I'd applied for early admission to their environmental science program. The day that letter arrived, I was too nervous to open it myself. I handed it to my mom and asked her to read it first. She opened the envelope with shaking hands, scanned the letter, and then started crying. Accepted, she whispered. Full scholarship. And Andrew, listen to this. We are particularly impressed by your research experience and your potential for contributing to our understanding of climate change impacts on ecosystem dynamics. We would be honored to have you join our program. I felt dizzy with relief and excitement. This was it, the next chapter of my life, built on a foundation of authenticity and passion instead of fear and people-pleasing. That evening, we had a celebration dinner with extended family. My aunt, the same one who'd been in the kitchen that day 5 years ago, pulled me aside during dessert. Andrew, I owe you an apology, she said. I was here the day your mother was venting about wanting you to be different. I should have spoken up, should have reminded her how special you were exactly as you were. I was surprised by her directness, but also grateful for the acknowledgement. I've watched you these past few years, she continued, and I've seen you struggle to become someone you weren't. But I've also seen you find your way back to yourself. That takes incredible strength. Thank you, I said, but I think everything happened the way it needed to. If I hadn't heard what Mom said, I might never have learned how to stand up for who I really am. As graduation approached, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. In many ways, overhearing my mother's words had been devastating, but it had also been a gift, forcing me to confront the difference between who I was and who I thought I should be. The senior awards ceremony was held a week before graduation. I wasn't expecting anything major. I'd only been back in academic clubs for 2 years, and my grades, while good, weren't perfect. But when they called my name for the Outstanding Achievement in Science award, I felt a surge of pride that was completely different from any recognition I'd received for wrestling. This award was for being myself, for pursuing what I loved, for contributing something meaningful to my school community. When I walked across the stage to accept it, I saw my parents in the audience, both crying and clapping enthusiastically. But the moment that really meant something to me came after the ceremony. Jake, my former wrestling teammate, approached me outside the auditorium. Hey Drew, he said, looking a little awkward. I just wanted to say, what you did, quitting the team to pursue what you actually wanted. That was brave. Thanks, Jake. How are things going for you? He shrugged, still wrestling, still trying to make my dad happy. But I've been thinking about what you said, about being true to yourself. Maybe after graduation, I'll figure out what that means for me. It's never too late, I said, echoing my mother's words from months earlier. Graduation day was perfect. Not because everything went smoothly, the ceremony was long, the speeches were boring, and it was uncomfortably hot in our caps and gowns, but because I felt completely present for it. I wasn't worrying about living up to expectations or trying to be someone I wasn't. I was just Andrew, the kid who loved science and was excited about his future. When they called my name, I walked across the stage with confidence, knowing that I was graduating as my authentic self. In the audience, I could see my parents beaming with pride, and I knew that their pride was for the real me, not some version of me they'd wished into existence. The summer between high school and college was bittersweet. I was excited about starting university, but I was also sad to leave behind the community I'd found in my hometown. Sarah and I made plans to stay in touch, and several other science club members promised to visit me at college. Dr. Martinez had invited me to spend part of the summer working in his lab, giving me a head start on the research I'd be doing as an undergraduate. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I could feel my skills and confidence growing with each passing day. One afternoon, as I was analyzing butterfly migration data, Dr. Martinez sat down beside me. Andrew, I've been meaning to ask you something. What made you choose environmental science? You clearly have the aptitude for any field you wanted. I thought about his question, considering how to explain the journey that had brought me here. I think it started started with wanting to understand the world around me, I said, but it became about wanting to protect it. When I realized how much damage we're doing to ecosystems, how many species we're losing, I felt like I had to do something. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. That's the best possible motivation for a scientist. Personal investment in the outcome. But also, I continued, I think this field chose me as much as I chose it. It fits who I am naturally. I spent years trying to be someone else, and it was exhausting. This feels right. That's rare, he said. Most people spend their whole lives trying to figure out what feels right. You're lucky to have found it so young. I almost didn't, though. I almost let other people's expectations override my own instincts. But you didn't. That's what matters. As August approached and my departure for college grew closer, I found myself thinking about that 12-year-old boy who'd overheard his mother's disappointment in the kitchen. I felt tremendous compassion for him, for his confusion, his hurt, his desperate attempts to transform himself into someone else. But I also felt grateful to him. His pain had been real, but it had also been the catalyst for everything that followed. Without that moment of crisis, I might never have learned the difference between authentic self-improvement and self-abandonment. The night before I left for college, my parents and I sat on the back porch looking at the stars through my telescope. We'd been doing this regularly since my dad had expressed interest in astronomy, and it had become one of our favorite family activities. I have something to tell you both, I said as we watched Jupiter's moons move slowly across the sky. I've been thinking about that day in the kitchen, when I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Linda. My mom stiffened slightly, but I continued. I used to think of it as the worst day of my life, but I've realized it might actually have been one of the most important. Not because what you said was okay, it wasn't, but because it forced me to confront some really important questions about who I am and who I want to be. Andrew, my mom started, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. If I hadn't overheard that conversation, I might have just drifted along, never really examining whether I was living authentically. I might have ended up spending my whole life trying to be someone else without even realizing it. My dad adjusted the telescope's focus. So you're saying you're grateful for that pain. I'm saying I'm grateful for what I learned from it. The pain itself was awful, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it taught me things I needed to know. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars and thinking about the strange paths that lead us to become who we're meant to be. I'm proud of you, my mom said finally, not just for your achievements, but for your wisdom. You've taught me things about authenticity and courage that I'm still learning. We all taught each other, I said. That's what families do. The drive to college the next morning was emotional but exciting. As we loaded my belongings into the dorm room, I felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation that I recognized as the feeling of being exactly where I was supposed to be. My roommate was a pre-med student from California who shared my love of early morning hikes and documentary films. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our mutual excitement about the research opportunities available at the university. When it came time for my parents to leave, we all cried a little, but they were tears of joy and pride rather than worry or regret. Remember, my mom said as she hugged me goodbye, you're exactly who you're supposed to be. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I won't, I promised. I know who I am now. My first semester of college exceeded all my expectations. The coursework was challenging but engaging. The professors were passionate and knowledgeable, and my fellow students shared my enthusiasm for learning and discovery. I joined the undergraduate research program, continued my work with Dr. Martinez, and even started a campus club focused on local conservation efforts. But the most important thing I learned wasn't from any textbook or lecture. It was the lesson I'd been learning for years, that authenticity isn't a destination you reach, but a practice you maintain. Every day I had to choose to be true to myself rather than to others' expectations. Some days that choice was easy. When I was in the lab, analyzing data or designing experiments, I felt completely aligned with my purpose. When I was leading nature walks for other students or writing articles for the campus environmental magazine, I knew I was exactly where I belonged. Other days the choice was harder. When I met new people who seemed impressed by certain achievements or interests, I sometimes felt the old temptation to emphasize parts of myself that might be more appealing. When I talked to classmates who seemed more confident or accomplished, I occasionally wondered if I should be doing something different, but I'd learned to recognize these moments of self-doubt as opportunities to recommit to authenticity. Instead of trying to impress people with who I thought they wanted me to be, I focused on finding the people who appreciated who I actually was. One evening in late October, I was video chatting with my parents when my mom brought up something that surprised me. Andrew, I've been thinking about starting a support group for parents, she said, specifically for parents who feel like they've pressured their kids to be someone they're not. Really? You think there's interest in that? I think there are more families like ours than you might imagine. Parents who love their children but somehow get caught up in trying to mold them instead of nurturing them. My dad nodded. Your mom's been talking to other parents at her college classes, and apparently our story isn't that unusual. A lot of people have realized they've been living vicariously through their kids instead of supporting their kids' actual dreams. That sounds like it could really help people, I said. What would you do in the group? Share stories, I guess. Talk about how to recognize when you're projecting your own unfulfilled dreams onto your children. Figure out how to support kids in becoming who they're meant to be rather than who you think they should be. I felt a surge of pride in my mother's growth and self-awareness. I think that's amazing, Mom. You should definitely do it. I was hoping you might be willing to talk to the group sometime. Share your perspective on what it's like to be on the receiving end of that kind of pressure. The idea made me nervous, but I also saw how it could be helpful. I'd be honored to help. By the end of my first year of college, I felt like I'd found my rhythm. My grades were strong, my research was progressing well, and I'd built a community community of friends who shared my values and interests. More importantly, I felt like myself, not the version of myself I thought others wanted, but the genuine, authentic me. That summer, I returned home to work with a local environmental consulting firm, applying my research skills to real-world conservation projects. It was satisfying to see how my academic learning could translate into practical impact, and it reinforced my sense that I was on the right career path. During one of my mom's support group meetings, I had the opportunity to share my story with a room full of parents who were grappling with similar issues. It was emotional for everyone involved, but I could see that my experience resonated with their children's struggles. After the meeting, a father approached me with tears in his eyes. "My son is a musician," he said, "but I've been pushing him toward business school because I thought it would be more stable. Hearing your story made me realize I'm asking him to betray his authentic self." "It's not too late," I told him. "Some of the best conversations I've had with my parents happened after they realized what they'd been doing. Your son probably just wants to know that you believe in him." These conversations reminded me how fortunate I was to have parents who'd been willing to acknowledge their mistakes and change their approach. Not every family was able to have those difficult conversations and emerge stronger. As I started my sophomore year, I felt more confident and purposeful than ever. I'd declared my major in environmental science with a focus on conservation biology, and I was working on an independent research project studying the effects of urban development on local bird populations. But the real measure of my growth wasn't academic or professional, it was personal. I'd learned to trust my own instincts, to value my own interests, and to build relationships based on authenticity rather than people-pleasing. I discovered that being true to yourself isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. One evening, as I was analyzing data in the lab, I received an email that would change the trajectory of my undergraduate experience. It was from Dr. Lisa Park, a professor at a research station in Costa Rica, inviting me to participate in a semester-long field study of tropical ecosystem dynamics. The opportunity was incredible, a chance to work with leading researchers in one of the world's most biodiverse regions, contributing to cutting-edge conservation science. But it also meant leaving campus for an entire semester, missing out on the social and academic experiences I'd been enjoying. 5 years ago, I would have agonized over the decision, trying to figure out what other people expected me to do. But now, the choice was clear. This was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd dreamed of, perfectly aligned with my interests and career goals. I called my parents that night to tell them about the invitation. "Costa Rica," my mom said, her voice a mix of excitement and concern. "That sounds amazing, but also a little scary." "It is scary," I admitted, "but it's also exactly what I want to do with my life. This is the kind of research that could make a real difference in conservation efforts." "Then you have to do it," my dad said firmly. "We didn't raise you to play it safe. We raised you to follow your passion and make a positive impact on the world." Hearing those words from my father, who'd once pushed me toward more conventional achievements, was incredibly meaningful. It confirmed that our family had truly transformed our understanding of success and fulfillment. The semester in Costa Rica was transformative. Working in the field, surrounded by the incredible biodiversity of the rainforest, I felt more connected to my purpose than ever before. The research we conducted had immediate applications for conservation policy, and I could see how my work was contributing to something larger than myself. But perhaps more importantly, the experience taught me about resilience and adaptability. Living in a remote research station, dealing with equipment failures and unpredictable weather, working alongside researchers from different cultural backgrounds, all of these challenges pushed me to grow in ways I hadn't expected. When I returned to campus for my junior year, I brought with me a deeper sense of confidence and purpose. My research in Costa Rica had resulted in data that would be published in a peer-reviewed journal, with me as second author. I'd also developed connections with researchers around the world, opening up possibilities for future collaborations. More importantly, I'd proven to myself that I could thrive in challenging environments, that my passion for environmental science wasn't just an academic interest, but a genuine calling that could sustain me through difficulties. The transformation in my relationship with my parents continued to evolve. My mother's support group had grown into a regional network, and she'd become a sought-after speaker on the topic of supporting children's authentic development. My father had completed his engineering degree and was working on environmental projects with his company. "You know," my mom said during one of our regular phone calls, "starting that support group taught me something important. I wasn't the only parent who'd lost sight of what really mattered. There are a lot of us who got so caught up in societal expectations that we forgot to nurture our children's authentic selves. But you figured it out," I pointed out. "That's what matters. I figured it out because you had the courage to stand up for who you really are. You taught me that authenticity is more important than approval." As I prepared for my senior year, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The scared, confused 12-year-old who'd overheard his mother's disappointment had grown into a confident young man who knew his own worth and purpose. But I also recognized that this growth hadn't happened in isolation. It had required support from teachers like Mrs. Chen, who'd seen my potential and encouraged me to pursue it. It had required friends like Sarah, who'd accepted me for who I was and challenged me to grow. Most importantly, it had required parents who'd been willing to examine their own assumptions and change their approach. Looking back, I could see that every difficult moment had been part of a larger pattern of growth and self-discovery. The pain of feeling rejected by my mother had led to the joy of finding my authentic self. The struggle of trying to be someone I wasn't had led to the relief of embracing who I actually was. Senior year brought new challenges and opportunities. I was applying to graduate programs, preparing for comprehensive exams, and completing an honors thesis based on my Costa Rica research research, but I was also serving as a peer mentor for younger students, sharing my experience with others who were struggling to find their authentic path. One of my mentees was a sophomore named Marcus, coincidentally sharing a name with my former wrestling captain. This Marcus was a pre-med student whose parents had insisted on that path, even though his real passion was for environmental engineering. "I don't know how to tell them," he said during one of our meetings. "They've sacrificed so much for my education, and they're so proud of me for getting into the pre-med program. What do you think they want most for you?" I asked. "Do they want you to be a doctor, or do they want you to be happy and successful?" "Happy and successful, I think. But they believe being a doctor is the only way to achieve that. Maybe they just need to understand that there are different definitions of success," I suggested, "and that success without authenticity isn't really success at all." Over the course of several months, I helped Marcus navigate the difficult conversations with his parents, drawing on my own experience and the insights I'd gained from my mother's support group work. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wondered if I was giving good advice. But eventually, Marcus's parents came around. They agreed to let him switch to environmental engineering, and by the end of the year, they were as excited about his new path as he was. Seeing his transformation reminded me of my own journey and reinforced my belief in the power of authentic living. Graduation approached faster than I'd expected. I'd been accepted to several excellent graduate programs, ultimately choosing to continue my work with Dr. Martinez while also collaborating with researchers I'd met in Costa Rica. The future felt full of possibility and purpose. At the senior awards ceremony, I received recognition for my research achievements and my contributions to campus environmental initiatives. But the moment that meant the most to me came when Dr. Martinez introduced me to the audience. "Andrew represents the best of what we hope to achieve in higher education," he said. "Not just academic excellence, but the courage to pursue authentic purpose and the commitment to use knowledge in service of something greater than oneself." After the ceremony, my parents and I walked around campus, reminiscing about my 4 years there. We stopped by the lab where I'd spent countless hours, the dormitory where I'd lived as a freshman, the library where I'd written my honors thesis. "Do you remember that day when you told us you were quitting wrestling?" my mom asked as we sat on a bench overlooking the campus pond. "Of course. I was terrified you'd be disappointed." "I was disappointed," she admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. I was disappointed in myself for not seeing sooner that you were trying to be someone you weren't. But you figured it out eventually. We all did." My dad put his arm around my shoulder. "You know what I'm most proud of? Not your achievements, though they're impressive. I'm most proud of your integrity. You never compromised who you were, even when it would have been easier." "I tried to compromise," I pointed out. "For 5 years, I tried to be someone else. But you found your way back," my mom said. "That's what matters." The graduation ceremony itself was a celebration not just of academic achievement, but of personal growth and self-discovery. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, for the people who'd supported me along the way, and for the future that lay ahead. But perhaps most importantly, I felt grateful for that 12-year-old boy who'd overheard his mother's words in the kitchen. His pain had been real and significant, but it had also been the beginning of a journey toward authenticity and self-acceptance that had shaped everything that followed. As I looked out at the audience, I saw my parents beaming with pride, and I knew that their pride was for the real me, not the person they'd once thought they wanted me to be, but the person I'd always been meant to become. The road ahead was full of challenges and opportunities. Graduate school would be demanding, research would be challenging, and the work of environmental conservation would require dedication and persistence. But I faced the future with confidence, knowing that I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Looking back on this journey, I realized that the most heartbreaking thing I'd ever heard about myself had also been the most transformative. It had forced me to confront fundamental questions about identity, authenticity, and self-worth. It had taught me the difference between being loved for who you are and being loved for who you pretend to be. Most importantly, it had shown me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the willingness to be authentic despite the fear of rejection or disappointment. That lesson would stay with me for the rest of my life, guiding me through whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. As we drove away from campus for the last time as an undergraduate student, I felt a deep sense of completion and anticipation. The scared, confused boy who'd hidden in the hallway listening to his mother's disappointment had grown into a confident young man who knew his own worth and purpose. But more than that, our entire family had grown and changed together. We'd learned to see each other clearly, to value authenticity over performance, and to support each other's genuine dreams rather than trying to impose our own unfulfilled desires. The journey toward authenticity isn't always easy, and it's never really finished. Every day brings new opportunities to choose honesty over people-pleasing, courage over comfort, authenticity over approval. But I'd learned that this choice, difficult as it sometimes is always worth making. Because at the end of the day, being true to yourself isn't just about personal fulfillment, it's about contributing your unique gifts to the world, building genuine relationships, and living a life that reflects your deepest values and aspirations. The most heartbreaking thing I'd ever heard about myself had become the catalyst for the most meaningful transformation of my life. And for that, despite all the pain it had caused, I would always be grateful.